Employees who retired at 55 were 89% more likely to die within the following 10 years than those who kept working until 65. That result held even after researchers adjusted for health differences. In practical terms, retiring a decade earlier was associated with nearly double the mortality rate over the next decade. That's not a headline most retirement plans account for. On paper, early retirement is supposed to be the reward: more time, less stress, financial security. And for a while, that description holds. Mornings slow down. Pressure fades. The calendar finally opens up. The breakdown starts somewhere else. Work isn't just a paycheck. It's the framework that quietly keeps behavior, attention, and identity aligned. Remove it all at once, and nothing fails immediately. But over time, the absence of structure compounds, and most people don't recognize what's missing until the effects become visible. I'm Alex. Today we'll look at why retirement as it's commonly designed carries a hidden health risk, what the data actually shows about stopping work, and why financial independence only works when it's paired with something more than free time. And that problem begins with a simple fact. Most plans overlook retirement. As we know, it is a modern experiment, and the human brain didn't evolve for decades without contribution. Retirement as a modern experiment. Retirement, as we think about it today, is a very recent idea. For almost all of human history, people didn't stop working at a set age. They worked until their bodies couldn't, and when contribution ended, life usually wasn't far behind. The idea of spending 20 or 30 years in leisure only became common after the mid-20th century. Pensions expanded. Life expectancy rose. Work was suddenly framed as something you escape rather than something you gradually adapt. From a biological perspective, that shift happened almost overnight. The human brain evolved expecting usefulness, daily problems to solve, people depending on you, a reason to get up that wasn't optional. Farming, trading, teaching, repairing contribution was continuous, even as physical capacity declined. There was no clean break between working life and non-working life. Modern retirement breaks that pattern abruptly. One year you have deadlines, coworkers, routines, and pressure. The next year, none of it exists. The brain doesn't taper, it drops. You can see this in real life. Recently retired neighbors who suddenly lose track of days. Former managers who struggle to describe what they do now. Highly capable people whose calendars quietly empty out. This isn't a moral failure. It's a design problem. Retirement assumes the human mind functions well in long-term absence of obligation. Evolution never tested that assumption. And that's where the risk begins. Why some retirees thrive. Not everyone declines after leaving work. You've probably seen the exception. Someone in their 70s who's busy, sharp, and socially active. They retired, but their days are full. And the reason matters. The people who thrive don't replace work with nothing. They replace it with something demanding. A retired teacher who tutors twice a week and still prepares lessons. A former tradesman who volunteers repairing homes and has deadlines again. A grandmother who provides daily childcare and suddenly has a schedule tighter than before. What looks like leisure from the outside is usually structured contribution underneath. There are expectations. Other people depend on them. If they don't show up, something doesn't get done. These retirees still wake up at a certain time. They still have places to be. They still solve problems that don't have instant rewards. And that's the difference. The brain doesn't care whether the work is paid. It responds to usefulness. You can see this culturally as well. In places known for long, healthy lifespans, older adults don't exit life at a certain age. They farm smaller plots, they teach, they help run community spaces. The role changes, but contribution doesn't stop. Here's the quiet contrast. Two people can stop earning income on the same day. One gradually disengages. The other stays embedded in responsibility. Financially, they're identical. Functionally, they are on very different trajectories. That contrast is the clue most retirement planning misses. The moment after freedom recalled and refined. Picture the morning after you no longer need a paycheck. Not a vacation. A normal Tuesday. No meetings, no deadlines. No reason the day has to start at any particular time. At first, that feels like relief. You sleep in. Coffee takes longer. There's nothing urgent pulling you forward. Now picture that same morning 6 months later. The novelty is gone. There's still no pressure, but now there's also no direction. No one is waiting. Nothing breaks if you delay. The day becomes optional in a way it never was before. At that point, most people drift into one of three paths. Some choose comfort, more rest, more screens, more entertainment. The days stay easy, but they also get thinner. Others rush to replace pressure. New projects, new goals, new busyness. Not because it matters yet, but because stillness feels unsettling. A smaller group does something quieter. They keep structure on purpose. They decide when the day starts. They commit to people or responsibilities that don't disappear when motivation dips. Here's the question worth sitting with for a moment. If tomorrow were financially free, which option would you drift toward without forcing yourself? Comfort replacement pressure or deliberate structure? What's revealing is that this choice has nothing to do with money. Everyone here is free. The difference is how each person responds when external demand disappears. That moment right after freedom arrives is where trajectories quietly begin to separate. Mortality and health data after retirement. When researchers started tracking what happens after people stop working, the results were uncomfortable. One long-running study following corporate employees found that those who retired at 55 were far more likely to die within the next decade than those who stayed employed until 65. The gap wasn't subtle. It approached double the mortality rate over 10 years, even after adjusting for health at retirement. This pattern didn't stay isolated. Similar findings showed up across countries and datasets. Each year of earlier retirement carried a measurable increase in death risk, not because people suddenly made worse financial decisions, but because something fundamental changed in daily life. Health outcomes shifted too. Rates of diagnosed depression rose sharply after retirement. The likelihood of developing at least one chronic physical condition increased. These effects were strongest in the first few years, the same window, when routines disappear and days lose shape. You can see it play out in ordinary settings. Recently retired men who stop walking as much because there's nowhere to go. Former professionals who lose daily social contact overnight. People who were mentally engaged for decades and suddenly aren't challenged by anything harder than a television schedule. The most telling detail is what didn't explain the data. It wasn't income. It wasn't access to healthcare. It wasn't pre-existing illness. The risk appeared when work stopped, and nothing equally demanding replaced it. Cognitive decline after stopping work. The mental decline that follows retirement isn't subtle, and it isn't just about aging. When researchers compared retirees with people of the same age who kept working, the difference showed up quickly. Processing speed slowed, memory weakened, decision-making became less sharp, and the change accelerated in the first years after work stopped. The reason is simple, but uncomfortable. For most adults, work is the main source of daily cognitive strain. Meetings force recall. Deadlines demand prioritization. Problems arrive without warning and don't solve themselves. Even jobs people dislike still exercise attention judgment and memory. Remove that demand overnight and the brain doesn't coast. It downshifts. You can see this in real life. Recently retired professionals who say they feel foggy by mid-morning. Former managers who struggle to track simple plans without writing everything down. People who were once mentally stretched all day and now go hours without solving a single new problem. The brain follows use. When challenge disappears, neural efficiency fades. Not because time passed, but because stimulation dropped. What's striking is how fast this happens when nothing replaces the demand. Reading casually isn't enough. Watching documentaries isn't enough. The brain needs friction. It needs effort. It needs problems with consequences. This is why cognitive decline often appears soon after retirement, not decades later. It's not the calendar that changes the brain. It's the sudden absence of work that once kept it sharp. What work really provides: 5 functions. Most people think work is mainly about income. That's the obvious part. What's less obvious is everything work provides quietly without ever being labeled. First is structure. Work sets when the day starts, when it ends, and what happens in between. Remove that and sleep drifts meals, drift movement drifts. Days lose edges. Second is identity. For decades, when someone asks what you do, there's an answer. When that answer disappears, many people feel oddly unanchored. You can see it when retirees still introduce themselves by what they used to be. Third is social connection. For most adults, work supplies daily human contact outside family. Conversations, disagreements, shared goals. When work ends, that network often disappears overnight, especially for people who didn't build social ties elsewhere. Fourth is purpose. Work creates the sense that you're useful, that something depends on you. Even imperfect work provides contribution. When that disappears, a quiet emptiness often replaces it. And fifth is challenge. Deadlines, problems, learning curves. These force the brain to stay engaged. Without challenge, mental sharpness fades faster than most expect. None of this shows up on a retirement spreadsheet, but remove all five at once, and the system destabilizes. That's when decline starts looking less mysterious and more predictable. Retirement versus financial independence. Retirement and financial independence sound similar, but they lead to very different outcomes. Retirement is built around stopping, a date, a number. The idea that once income is no longer required work should end as well. Financial independence is something else entirely. It's the point where money no longer dictates your choices. You don't have to work for income, which means you get to choose what, how, and whether you work at all. The distinction matters because the math is identical. Two people can have the same portfolio, the same expenses, and the same freedom from financial pressure. One fills the time with leisure and drifts. The other redirects effort into something meaningful and stays engaged. You can see this in real life. Someone leaves a corporate job and starts consulting part-time, not for the money, but for the problem solving. Another opens a small workshop, mentors younger people, or builds something they never had time for before. The paycheck is optional. The work isn't. Financial independence removes coercion. Retirement often removes structure. One preserves leverage. The other eliminates friction entirely. This is why people who keep working after they no longer need to often report lower stress, not higher. They can say no. They can walk away. They can choose challenge without dependence. Stopping work isn't the achievement. Choosing work is. And confusing those two ideas is where many plans quietly go wrong. Clarification of the argument. This isn't an argument for working forever in a job you hate. Grinding until burnout isn't the solution, and it was never the point. Leaving unhealthy work can absolutely improve quality of life. The issue is what replaces it. There's a difference between escaping bad work and eliminating work entirely. People who thrive after leaving their careers usually don't drift into nothing. They walk away from obligation, not from effort. They keep doing things that demand attention, responsibility, and follow through, just without financial pressure attached. You can see the contrast clearly. One person leaves a stressful role and spends years recovering, waiting to feel motivated again. Another leaves the same role and immediately reshapes their time around projects they actually care about. Same freedom, very different outcomes. Optional work changes the psychology completely. When you're not dependent on income, stress drops. Decisions slow down. You can say no without consequences. That alone makes work feel lighter, even when it's challenging. What damages health isn't effort. It's aimlessness. It's waking up with nothing pulling you forward and nothing resisting you either. The human system doesn't respond well to that environment for long. So the clarification matters. This isn't about productivity. It's about alignment. Removing financial pressure while keeping purpose intact creates stability. Removing both at the same time creates a vacuum. And that distinction explains why some people improve after leaving work and others quietly unravel. Planning framework. Most plans solve only one variable: money. How much you need, when you can stop, what the withdrawal rate looks like. That part is well understood. What's usually ignored is the second variable, what fills the space once work becomes optional. Financial independence is a math problem. Expenses times a multiple. Savings rate, time. Once the number is reached, income pressure is gone. But that moment also removes the structure that quietly organized your life for decades. People who struggle after leaving work usually didn't fail financially. They succeeded and then discovered they had no plan for how their days would function without external demands. The mistake is assuming purpose can be figured out later, that once the calendar clears, clarity will show up on its own. In practice, the opposite happens. When pressure disappears, direction often disappears with it. A better framework treats money and purpose as parallel tracks. You build financial independence over time. At the same time, you build roles, skills, and commitments that exist outside your job. Things that don't vanish when a paycheck does. You can see this in people who transition well. They don't wait until the last day of work to decide what matters. They already have something that pulls them forward, a responsibility, a craft, a group that expects them to show up. When work becomes optional, whatever you've been practicing fills the gap. And that's the part most plans forget to prepare for. Practical actions before financial independence. The most important preparation doesn't start after work ends. It starts years before. And it doesn't look like retirement planning at all. First, build an identity that isn't tied to your job title. Become known for something else while you're still working: coaching a team, teaching a skill, running a local group. When work disappears, you shouldn't lose the answer to who you are. Second, create social connections that don't depend on employment. Work friendships vanish faster than people expect. The people who transition well already have standing commitments: weekly meetups, volunteer roles, shared projects that don't end with a resignation letter. Third, keep your brain under load. Learn things that are difficult: languages, instruments, technical skills, not casually, with deadlines and progression. The goal isn't entertainment, it's sustained challenge. Finally, get clear on what actually pulls you forward when no one is paying you. Not what sounds impressive, not what fills time. What would you still show up for on a random Wednesday when motivation is low? This is the part most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. It forces honesty. But it's also the difference between freedom that expands your life and freedom that quietly shrinks it. When financial pressure disappears, whatever you've built outside work becomes your foundation. And if nothing is there, the fall is silent but real. Key takeaways. Retirement failure rarely comes from running out of money. It comes from removing structure, challenge, and usefulness all at once. The data shows that stopping work abruptly changes how people think, move, and connect long before finances become a problem. What protects health and cognition isn't leisure. It's continued engagement without financial pressure. The people who do well after leaving their careers aren't exceptional. They simply replace paid work with chosen responsibility before drift sets in. This reframes the goal. Financial independence isn't about reaching a point where nothing is required of you. It's about reaching a point where you can choose what deserves your effort. Money solves the pressure problem. Purpose solves the human one. If there's a common thread across everything here, it's this: freedom without structure weakens over time, but freedom paired with chosen responsibility compounds. What you practice before work becomes optional determines what fills the space after it does.